Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. This is what I'm going to be talking about today. This is how you can find me online. You can tweet at me. As Mary said, I work at SpeedCurve, which means that I get to work with Mark Zeman, who is a Velocity alumni as well, and Steve Souders, who many of you might have heard of. He's one of the co-founders of Velocity. Kind of depending on who you ask, he's either the godfather or the Gandalf of performance. So, and I also help co-curate WPOstats.com with Tim Cadlick, and it's a repository of performance case studies that relate performance to user experience and business and other metrics. So really quick show of hands, and I'm happy I can actually see people's faces, or at least bodies in the crowd today. How many people are at Velocity? This is your first Velocity, your first time ever being here. Oh, wow, that's great. OK. So this is my 13th Velocity. I'm also, so I've been coming since about 2010. Interestingly, I'm now co-chair of Fluent, which is sort of a funny migration to take. But when we moved when O'Reilly made the choice to move the front-end performance aspect of things over to Fluent, it kind of made sense for me to sort of follow that and help shepherd that process. So as I said, this is my 13th Velocity, and if you had told me 8 years ago when I went to my first Velocity and first got involved in the performance space, that someday I would be standing here keynoting and that I would be working with Steve Souders, I would have been like, what? I don't think so, but here I am. My background's in user experience, mostly doing usability testing and studies. That's what I started doing about 20 years ago on a computer that looked like this. How many people have ever used something that was this old? Just, hey, awesome, my people. I was the rock star in the office too. I had like the best computer. So I would bring, back in the day, sometimes dozens of people in to do usability tests and gather metrics the really, really old-fashioned way. And that way is still valid today, and it's still a meaningful way to understand your users. But over the years, now that we have access to better tools for performance measurement and analytics, I now get to measure millions and even billions of user experiences and page views. So it's really interesting to see how this field has grown. I am not a developer. I'm not an engineer. I have zero expertise in those areas. So kind of when I started working in performance and I first started coming to Velocity, I kind of felt like this guy, like a classic fish out of water. I don't pretend that I'm the first person to care about correlating web performance with user experience, but I was probably the first person who had it as their full-time job. Like I was hired to do that by a company called Strangeloop, which was a vendor for front-end optimization solutions. And so as a fish out of water, fortunately, I kind of like being a fish out of water. I've always liked like fish out of water TV shows. Maybe I grew up on those, like Newhart and Northern Exposure, things like that. And I sort of related to those people who were kind of out of their element, but kind of just sort of figured it out as they went along. Fortunately, I learned enough from coming to Velocity and meeting great people, doing my own original research, learning a lot from other people's research, and last year published a book with O'Reilly. This is it. You don't have to buy it or anything. I just thought I would put it up there to show that it's a real thing. If you'd like to buy it, that would be great, but you don't feel you must. And I also kind of feel like I'm sort of like a user experience care bear. Like I just sort of blast like user experience love out. Like remember the users, share. So I sort of in the past several years, I've done a lot of talking and writing blog posts and articles and things like that about why we need to care about users, and always kind of putting that at the forefront of what people are thinking about. So why should we care? I mean, we should care because it's kind of the humane, right thing to do. I'm going to read this quote aloud because I really enjoy this quote. This is a few years old, and it was when kind of the idea that page speed matters really started to appear in mainstream media. And so there was an article, a great article that was written in the New York Times, and it featured, I think it was sort of highlighting some Google research that had been performed about how even like 100 milliseconds page delay mattered. And it's a really great article. I recommend you look it up. The title's at the bottom of this slide. But there's a reader comment where somebody said, and I just picture this like, kind of this cranky old like SNL type character, kind of just go, oh, pity the hyper impatient web generation, such busy lives, so many important things to do, like post the latest drivel onto their Facebook pages or download the YouTube viral video of the day. Oops, sorry, of the minute. So I think about that person, and I think they're not alone. Like I've since sort of heard people say things like, "Well, we should just learn to be patient. You know, why does it matter so much if pages are slow? It's a you problem. It's just, you know, it's kind of all in your head. Just adapt. Suck it up. Don't be a baby." But there's a reason why we care. The average web user believes, I'm not saying that this is actually the case, but they believe that they waste 2 days a year waiting for web pages to load. Like total, 2 days, 48 hours of their time, precious life moments spent waiting for pages to load. Do I think that's actually true? Probably not. But the fact is people feel this way. They feel the lag of the internet as a presence in their lives that actually prevents them from doing other things they would like to do. And to me, this is really, really important. Another thing that people feel is web stress. This is a term that was coined a few years ago with a paper that was released by CA Technologies, some research they had commissioned from a company called Fovians. And they hooked EEG headsets onto people and had them kind of go through the paces of doing different transactions on a desktop. And they found, were able to measure at a neurological level that when sites or apps are slow, we actually have to work 50% harder to stay on task. A few years later, when I was working for a company called Radware, we replicated that research but using mobile devices. And this is an actual photo from the study that we did. Basically found the same thing, even on mobile. And what was really important to notice in this particular study is the latency that we introduced was not massive amounts of latency. It was the equivalent of taking pages that loaded in roughly 3 or 4 seconds and making them load in 5 or 6 seconds. And we found the same issues with people having a harder time staying engaged, frustration levels spiking, engagement levels dropping, and we could measure all of this. This is, I love this phrase, rage clicks. A hat tip to Philip Tellis and Nick Jansma of SOSTA for kind of bringing this to my attention in a talk that they did at Velocity last year, where basically it's a real thing. You can measure this. Like your users are just pummeling their mouse buttons, or they're hitting the screen on their phones out of frustration at the fact that the site or the app isn't responding. And it was funny, a few years ago, I went looking for a study. I wanted to see if somebody had ever done any research on how people react when sites or apps are slow on their phone. And of course, somebody had done a study. It was Tea Leaf back in 2011. And I don't know how well you can see this at the back, but what was really interesting was that kind of about 60% of people more or less behaved normally. But all those other, the yellow, the green, the red, are all people having terrible reactions to the phones being slow. And the red is 4% of people claim that they've thrown their phone when the site was slow. I've never done that, but I'm definitely in the green and yellow camp. So I'm definitely not super proud of it, but I'm human. Oh, and I had to include this slide. So this slide, this photo really cracks me up. This is just some cheesy stock photo that I had, and it's so obviously a stock photo because I like this guy. I always think of his name's Barry, so I apologize if your name is also Barry. No connection. And he's just in his office, I guess. He's in kind of the bullpen area, and he's super mad because his phone isn't working or something like that. And he's just about to huck it across the room. And that's sort of funny. But what's really funny is that the woman in the background just does not care. Like, she's like, oh, that's just Barry again. It must be Wednesday. And she's just like, whatever. So that just really cracks me up. So slow websites and apps suck. Yes. we know that intuitively. But then how, as people who care about performance, do we define slow? And how do we define suck? Are these even definable? And for the past 4 or 5 years, that's sort of been the focus that I've been honing in on the work that I do and with the companies that I've worked for. I love this quote from Steve. He didn't tell me to put this in. I put it in, and then I said, hey, Steve, I really like this quote from you. And I'm going to read it out loud because I really like it. The real thing we're after is to create a user experience that people love and they feel is fast. So we might be front-end engineers, we might be dev, we might be ops, but what we really all are is perception brokers. And I think that's really, really important thing to remember, is what we're trying to do is improve people's perception of the web. And this is something that we care about throughout the full stack. So how do we do that? How do we find, if the goal is to make websites feel faster, and for that to be this mythical sort of fast enough for users, how do we actually find the metrics that correlate to fast enough, to user happiness? And over the years, these are all different metrics that that people have tried to correlate, and to some degree, one study that we did last year, I partnered with Pat Meenan at Google and big teams at both SOSTA and Google using SOSTA data and Google's AI to just grab tons and tons and tons of user data and pour it into the AI and see what kind of correlations we could find through machine learning that correlated to front-end metrics. So in this case, it was conversions, because they were mostly retail sites, conversions and bounce rate to measure engagement. And those are the best measures we could think of as indicators of user happiness. Did they actually engage with the site? Did they stay on it? Did they actually convert or buy anything? And what we found was actually that every metric really does matter, but some matter more than others. And specifically, the ones that we found mattered the most were start render, basically the moment that things start to render in the browser, and believe it or not, page load, which we didn't think was going to matter anymore because there's just so much kind of stuff that can happen behind the scenes, below the fold, that we kind of thought that page load was not that meaningful a metric, but it turns out it kind of is. A bunch of other metrics, I don't know which one, I'm not going to go through all of these, but time to first byte, time to interactive, TTI, speed index, which is a metric that you can get through web page test, visually complete, time to first paint, time to first meaningful paint, bytes in, total page size. All of these metrics have been and can be used to some degree to measure the user experience, to measure user happiness. But it's been really hard. What people really want is they want a unicorn metric. Everybody wants to know, what is the one thing that I can find, the one thing that I can measure on my pages that's going to really let me know if my visitors are happy, if they're engaged, if they're going to come back. We don't really have a unicorn metric. What we have a really hard-working hippopotamus with dreams, #life goals, to be that unicorn metric. And that hippopotamus is custom metrics. So maybe another quick show of hands. How many people here are familiar with the user timing spec and custom metrics? Okay, so a few. So I'm not going to go into it in a lot of detail, but what it is, I recommend that you check out the W3C Group's user timing spec. But what it lets you do is just measure performance of pages using high precision timestamps on specific assets that you know correlate to what users are seeing and what users need to see on a page. So for example, this is just a site, and you can see, well, how long does it take for the product image to display on my site? So if you're running an e-commerce site, you have a product page, you're going to look at, like, what's the main product image? Or if it's a landing page, what's your hero image? Where are your call to action buttons? Things like that. And so you can actually attach timers, timestamps to these individual assets and measure them along with all the other things that you're measuring on the page. Some great blog posts that I recommend that you read on the subject by Pat Meenan and Steve Souders about how to actually get these measurements and why they matter. And the reason why, I kind of bring it back to user experience again, I just want you to remember this, to take this away. Just some stats about seniors in the internet, and I'll get to why this is relevant in a second. 65% of seniors use the internet. That's roughly 2 out of 3. It's kind of an all-time high. That number is only going to keep growing because eventually we're all going to be seniors, so it's going to be closer to 100% of seniors using the internet. And something that you should know is that people who are 65 and older are much slower at using the internet than people who are under the age of 55. And that's not because they just lack internet skills. That's because between the ages of 25 and 60, our ability to use the web declines by almost 1% a year. So it's not like a switch turns on whenever we're 60 or 65, where it's like, oh no, suddenly I'm really crappy at using the internet. This is something that happens slowly over time. How many people are over the age of 25 in this crowd? Okay, so it's happening for everybody. 1% a year, almost 1% a year. And so what I would like for people to remember whenever we're building sites or building the engine that supports the site is stop using this myth of like, let's make websites so great, even your grandma can use them. Somebody tweeted a while ago, a tweet I really, really liked, which is, how about we just stop saying that, and then we can kind of kill ageism and sexism in one swoop. We just stop pulling grandmas out. Like, someday I want to be a grandma, and I don't want people saying, make a website that even Tammy can use. Please don't do that. And the reason why our ability to use the internet gets worse over time is all of these reasons. Our vision gets poorer, our dexterity gets poorer, our working memory gets poorer. In some ways, it's just inevitable. This is life. So, yay. I love bringing good news to people. But the good news is that we do compensate in other ways. So, experience, our wisdom, we kind of learn shortcuts and mental hacks for working around our cognitive deficiencies. So that's really great. So some takeaways here. I want everyone, if you take nothing else away, these 6 things right here, that user behavior is really, it's not static. Even as an individual user, how I use the internet varies depending on what device I'm on, what I'm trying to do, where I am, what my connection is like, whether or not I had enough sleep, if I'm hangry, if my kids are bothering me. Like, there's so many things. If I'm in a stressful situation, like trying to change a flight booking at the last minute because something in my travel plans got derailed. So user behavior is definitely always changing, and there's no unicorn metric. And anybody who tells you there is trying to really oversimplify a complicated problem, a complicated issue. You can't understand what you don't measure, and you can't measure what you don't understand. By that, what I mean is, if you don't understand your users and the site itself, the pages itself, and how your pages are built, you can't possibly attach metrics to that and do things like user timings and custom metrics to understand that. Performance is a team effort. It's not the job of just the performance engineers or just developers or just designers. It's really anybody who touches the page. And that means anybody who is responsible for anything that supports the page is responsible for performance. And the most effective teams are teams that really communicate and do this together. And I also want you to remember that even small changes, fixing the low-hanging fruit, images, third parties, ads, can make a really huge difference. So thank you very much for having me. It's been my huge pleasure and honor to be here. Reach out to me online if you have any questions.